Let's take a look at the routing options available on a MIDI track. Instead of an audio from chooser here, we have a MIDI from chooser. And this is going to determine where we get our MIDI signals from. By default, it's set to all instruments. That means that no matter what controllers are plugged in or other tracks are active, this track has the ability to accept MIDI from any source. If I record on the track and press a key on my MIDI controller, then this instrument plays because it's accepting that MIDI signal from my MIDI controller. If I click the drop-down menu, I can choose to narrow that. I can have it, for instance, accept MIDI signals only from my Arturia Mini Lab MIDI controller that I have hooked into the computer here. I could also have it accept signals only from the computer keyboard. This is the typing keyboard on the computer, and you can see I have that activated right here. So if I choose that, now when I press a key on my Arturia controller, nothing happens. But if I press a letter on my typing keyboard, it still accepts MIDI. You could also take MIDI from another track, and we're going to cover that in just a little bit. But the default option, all instruments, is good in most situations. The monitoring and audio out section are just the same as an audio track. You have the same destinations available. Once the MIDI passes through the instrument, it's converted to audio. So at this point in the chain, the track is treated as an audio track. Now, both audio and MIDI tracks have some configuration options in their input and output menus. So if I click on an input, I can choose Configure, and it brings up the Live Preferences dialog box. On an audio track, it goes to the Audio tab, and here you can choose Input Configuration or Output Configuration to tell Live a little bit more about the interface you're using and what inputs and outputs you want to use. If I click on the Configure option in a MIDI track, it takes me to the Link MIDI tab. And here, this is a little more complex, but it's basically the same thing. You're telling Live what MIDI controllers are connected to your system, or at least usually connected. You can see my push 2 is not connected, and so it's grayed out here. And then down here, you are telling Live what MIDI ports you want to activate for that controller that is attached. And so the more controllers you have hooked in here, the more options there will be down below. And in general, I like to have track and remote, those columns turned on for everything. And then sync is a special column. We will go over these options more in a later video, but you are welcome to investigate them in the Ableton Live manual.